Good afternoon. For a lot of you, it may be good morning. For some of you, it may even be good evening. Welcome, data center friends. I am Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute, and I want to welcome you to this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A live stream, where each week I tackle a handful, just a hair more than a handful sometimes, of the biggest sales and marketing challenges that we're hearing about all over the data center ecosystem, from operators, technology and facilities companies, construction and real estate companies, investors, and outsourced sales and marketing companies. So regardless of whether you're from an operator like a co-location, wholesale, hyperscale, edge, or modular company, or you sell to or partner with data centers, if you work on a GTM, a go-to-market team, and sales, marketing, account management, product, channel partnerships, or you're the executive sponsor, you are for sure in the right place if you're looking to level up on your personal influence, your team's growth, and your company's growth throughout the data center marketplace. So what's on the agenda for this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A Live? Well, we're first going to start by talking about how a data center services and IT asset disposition company, often called ITAD, can generate more highly qualified leads. Then we'll turn our attention to how data center providers can sell to enterprise IT using co-location for POP, point of presence sites, and DR as a service, disaster recovery as a service, DRaaS. Then we'll look at how a data center builder can modernize its sales and marketing. After that, we'll take a quick break for a message from our sponsor, and then we'll come back with the second half, where we'll look at how a data center provider can track emails for lead generation, how to market a small data center that only has 400 square feet available to lease. And as we head down the home stretch on this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A, we'll tackle how data center integrators can make sure that clients become referenceable after the experience. So let's jump right into this week's first question. How can a data center services and IT asset disposition, ITAD company, generate more highly qualified leads? So what we first need to figure out is, does your company, so your company is providing both. You're providing data center related services and asset disposition. How well integrated are those two lines of business? Is it the exact same client base, or are the clients a little bit different? For the sake of simplicity for this question, we're going to say that we same client base. In other words, the same clients that you're selling data center related services to also at some point are going to need you to take out their assets at end of life for asset disposition. So if it's the same client base, in order for us to generate more highly qualified leads, we first have to know what the definition of a qualified lead is. And for that, usually we're going to start by looking at where your company has been most successful. So we'll go to your website, we'll look for your case study section, your reviews, your references, testimonials, what have you. And we're looking for common threads, commonalities among where your company does best, what kind of clients are happiest with your data center services and IT asset disposition. So we want to first start, what do they have in common with their location? Is your company able to provide data center services and asset disposition globally, on a certain continent, in a certain country, in a part of a certain country? That is incredibly important for determining what's qualified versus not qualified. Because when it comes to the kinds of initiatives that a lot of companies in the data center ecosystem embark on, in terms of content and events and thought leadership, we really, really need to dial in the geographic location for what's qualified. Second, in our definition of what's qualified, and ultimately all of this is going to get wrapped into your ideal client profile, your ICP, is we need to know how big or how small or how medium size these companies are. Think Goldilocks, not too hot, not too cold, just right. So what is the band of what is the range of number of employees in which your company does best, both from a marketing, from a sales perspective, from an account management perspective, and for your clients being thrilled with what you provide. On the account management or customer success side, you might call this initial value, intended value, extended value, which opens up the opportunity for cross-sells and upsells and account expansion and strong positive digital word of mouth. So what range of employees is too small? Perhaps companies with fewer than 50 employees may not be able to afford your minimums for your data center services and asset disposition. And on the high end of the range, maybe companies with more than 1,000 employees or more than 10,000 employees could be too complex of a sale, too complex for your company to service. So let's take that, for example. Let's say we're looking for companies in a certain geographic region or regions that have between 50 and 1,000 employees. Okay, so we have most of the ideal client profile defined now. Next, however, I want you to think about, of the companies where you've been most successful, what do they have in common in terms of their business model, their industry, their vertical focus? Why is that important? Because when it comes to both services, especially on the technology side, and asset disposition, you can be sure that depending on where you're located and their business model, their industry, there may be unique compliance responsibilities that come up. In some cases, the compliance responsibilities apply regardless of the business model, regardless of the industry that your particular client or prospect is located in. But in some cases, there are for sure additional compliance responsibilities because a company, for example, is in healthcare or financial services or government or something like that. So when you're thinking about what's qualified versus non-qualified, we want to start by dialing in that ICP, that ideal client profile, so we know where they're located, geographic parameters, how big or how small they need to be, employee size. And you might banter around among your sales team a revenue range that could either be in dollars or pounds or euros or whatever currency you're located in. And that's all well and good, but if you're going to use a tool that is homogenized, that's standardized based on number of employees, like LinkedIn, the world's most popular B2B professional networking platform with 1 billion members, you're going to more than likely want to standardize on number of employees because that will give you the most precision across tools, across LinkedIn Campaign Manager, the paid ads tool, as well as LinkedIn Sales Navigator, and even just the filters that you would utilize on the free version of LinkedIn to a lesser degree, because a lot of the reason that people upgrade to Sales Navigator is to get better filters. But I would encourage you to standardize on number of employees. It can be helpful if your company thinks in terms of power, like kilowatts or megawatts or square footage or square meters. Sure, if that's relevant to your business model, include that in the one-page document, your ideal client profile. But if you're going to do a lot of lead generation and lead nurturing and outbound and ads and everything, and you're going to lean on LinkedIn, you will for sure want to standardize based on headcount, based on estimated number of employees and geographic region, and perhaps industries as well. So those are some of the big considerations for starters on defining what's qualified versus not qualified. Next, we need to know within these accounts, who are the right people for you to be spending time with? Who are the correct people that you need to build relationships with to educate and build trust? The individual people within the accounts, those are going to be your buyer personas. A buyer persona is a semi-fictional representation of an ideal client based on actual research and some select educated speculation. The actual research is incredibly important. It doesn't matter how much time Sally in your sales team has spent in the data center industry, or how many decades Bob has been around in this space. Their input is interesting, but it should just be part of the overall research process for defining, developing, and documenting your buyer personas. That internal input, maybe 20, 25%. The majority of your input for your buyer persona research and documenting these personas on paper, digital PDFs in your intranet wiki, what have you. so you can get alignment across teams. The majority of that research needs to come from spending time with the actual stakeholders, ideally face-to-face at their company site in their own environment. Second best would be like video interviews, like Zooms, things like that. Third best could be a survey and or looking at a stack of what comes up on search and social when you go looking for a representative group of 5, 10, 15 people that align with that buyer persona. In other words, like if you're looking at their LinkedIn profiles, how do they describe themselves? What kind of content do they share? What kind of skills are they endorsed for? Where do they hang out online and offline? The consensus on that, assuming you get a consensus on that, will help you back into the definition of a buyer persona, what their biggest goals are that they're evaluated on individually as a team and as a company, what their biggest challenges, their stressors are, what's driving them nuts, what's causing their vacations to get turned into less than vacations where they can't truly unplug and is really irritating their friends and family members to a certain degree to the point where they're getting pulled into work when they shouldn't be. All these things wrapped together will help you get crystal clear in their own words about what you need to focus your lead generation campaigns around. The in their own words is a lot more important than most people realize, because if it's all just based on your assumptions of your internal stakeholders, there's a really good chance that the messaging may be anywhere from less than ideal to completely falling flat. Their own words is incredibly important. Second, when it comes to segmenting your ideal client profile into who the most important stakeholders are that you need to build relationships with, I want you to prioritize these buyer personas. So the most important kind of stakeholder, that's your primary buyer persona. The second most important kind of stakeholder, that is your secondary buyer persona. And you may have a tertiary buyer persona. You may over time develop a negative buyer persona that when that particular kind of person shows up, it's like the kiss of death. You're going nowhere fast with building trust among the decision committee, educating with that decision committee. So we have our ideal client profile at the company level that will help you build out a target account list for account-based marketing. And then we have the people within those accounts that we need to build relationships with to educate and build trust. Those are your buyer personas. Once you have that in mind, you have a significant amount of the foundational work done for an effective lead generation plan. When I say significant, there's one really important part of all of this that we haven't talked about yet. That is that we now live in a world where a ton of self-directed research is happening before your best prospects and clients are willing to have a conversation with someone from your sales team. 10 years ago, that number was about halfway. About at the time, Corporate Executive Board, CEB, that's now owned by Gartner, put that number at 56%, meaning that 10 years ago, 56% of a typical sales cycle, a typical buyer's journey was over before sales contact or vendor contact. That number has accelerated forward now like a rocket as people lean heavily into self-directed buyers' journeys. So now we find that an estimated 83%, like more than 80% of the buyer's journey is over before you get to meet a prospect or client. So your sales team really is not getting to spend much time with prospects and clients anymore because the buyer is in the driver's seat. They don't need someone from your sales team to read the website to them anymore or read slides to them. The way that you earn your way back in there is your client-facing team members, especially among sales and marketing, and to a lesser degree, your account managers and product managers and channel managers, need to show up early and often with the right people in the right places at the right time as early as possible and in the right context so that they're seen as teachers, consultants, trusted advisors, subject matter experts, SMEs, and thought leaders. And when you do that, you earn your way in to be invited into their side of the virtual table because you're delivering value to them, because you're meeting them where they are, not where you'd like them to be at the tail end of the buyer's journey, at the tail end of the sales process, but where they actually are now. So you have awareness at the beginning of the journey, you have consideration in the middle, and then you have the decision stage. Most companies that are doing what they believe to be a passable job on lead generation are only showing up for the decision stage. They have their PDFs. They have their clap for us. We won awards. We're going to be at this conference, visit our booth to become a prospect. All of that, what in many cases, I don't want to call it selfish content, but it's content for the people that are just about ready to buy. However, there is a much, much, much wider part of the funnel, 10 times wider, with people that are in that first 80 to 90% of the journey, where they'd be a fantastic fit to buy from your company a few weeks, a few months, maybe several months later. But right now, they're just learning. And if you can show up and be part of the relationship equity that is doing the training, that's doing the educating, you will be able to have an enormous impact on their decision-making criteria and how they evaluate all of the competitive alternatives. And when you do that well, you're nearly guaranteed a place on the shortlist. When you do that at a world-class level, in some cases, you may begin to start neutralizing competitive options to the point that their shortlist collapses down to a short list of one, maybe two options by the time they get to the decision stage. Think in terms of like 28 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision. And if you're heavily weighted on field marketing, on event marketing, on conferences, there's a really good chance that you're doing a fantastic job on one or two touch points, maybe three touch points. You have your booth, you have this amazing poolside cabana party, you're sponsoring the golf tournament. But the reality is you don't get extra credit because you spent $200,000 on an event. It just counts as one touch point. So the question is, after that annual event is over, what are you going to do for the next 364 days when that prospecting client still needs to figure out how they're going to achieve their goal, how they're going to address that biggest challenge and stressor? How are you going to get surface area and more of those 28 touch points? Because right now, based on what I'm hearing, you're in there for one, two, maybe three of those 28 touch points. That leaves an enormous competitive vulnerability for your company. So when you take all of this into account, that's why it's so important that you dial in who your qualified leads are at a company level, who your qualified leads are, who sits on the decision committee at a buyer persona level. We recognize that if we don't step it up, we're going to be completely ignored 90% of the time. And other companies who actually get how much the world has changed, they're going to be the ones that are controlling the criteria because they got in there early and often with the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all, in the right context. So if you want to be able to generate more highly qualified leads for your data center service company and IT asset disposition services, it is exceptionally important that you reframe and reposition your client-facing team to be seen as teachers, consultants, subject matter experts, trusted advisors, and perhaps even thought leaders. The sooner you can do that, the more effective all of your efforts are going to be at generating leads, nurturing those leads into sales opportunities, closing those clients, and having the leverage that you need throughout the buyer's journey, including post-purchase, to be able to have a smooth post-purchase experience across initial, intended, and extended value. So you have amazing cross-sell and upsell opportunities. You have amazing digital word of mouth, and it helps power and fuel your company's growth in a way that's relevant to how data center services and IT asset disposition are now purchased in a world that's predominantly made up of decision makers and decision committees that are Gen X and millennials and Gen Z. Next up. How can data center providers sell to enterprise IT using colocation for POP, point of presence sites, and DRaaS, disaster recovery as a service? So your company is a data center provider, a data center operator. You want to sell to big companies, enterprise IT, and your primary offering is colocation that's being used for POP and disaster recovery. So with all of that in mind, the first thing that I would encourage you to do is to be self-aware about how tight or how broad you need to pick your battles. if your company is relatively small, and for a co-location operator, I would say relatively small would be an operator that has 5 sites or fewer. You need to get really, really dialed in to who those enterprise IT clients are. In other words, your ICP, your ideal client profile, needs to be super crisp about where these companies are located, where these enterprise IT companies are located, how big they are, because there's a lot of definitions about what enterprise is. Some people start enterprise at like 500 plus employees. Some people start enterprise at like 1,000 plus employees. Some people define enterprise as 10,000 plus employees. More than likely, the smaller your company is, the lower the bar you're going to have for what you consider enterprise. And there may also be some not so artificial glass ceilings in place that may preclude you from being super successful at like the largest of large enterprises, like at 10,000 plus employees. I can't answer that question for you without knowing more context into how many locations you have, whether you're public or privately traded, the pedigree of your investors, your capital structure, your brand reputation. There's a lot of things that come into play about how successful you would be at selling to an enterprise with 500 employees versus 5,000 employees versus 100,000 employees. Needless to say, the bigger the enterprise IT client you're selling to, the more demanding the requirements are going to be, and the more difficult it's going to be for you to meet those, going head to head with the largest of the large in our industry, going head to head with like Equinix, Digital Realty, NTT, companies like that. So with that in mind, I think it's really important to get dialed into where they're located, their company size, and the industries that you can flourish in. Because it's really hard as a relatively small company to cross a lot of different verticals and a lot of different industries successfully, especially across geographies. Because each time you move across geographies and potentially into some different industries, you encounter some compliance requirements that are not trivial. They can be deal breakers for whether your company is qualified or not. And a lot of how successful you're going to be with selling, with marketing and selling to and retaining those kinds of companies is way more than just a marketing and sales strategy. It's a product management. It's a overall services strategy of what you're willing, what you're able to provide to your clients. So understanding what exactly they need when they think of co-location, when they think of POP sites, when they think of disaster recovery as a service. So more than likely, if your company has a dedicated product management team, they're spending a lot of time talking with clients about what these actual needs are. And that gets rolled into the actual capabilities of your company. And that gets rolled into your product marketing and your website content and your sales enablement and everything that you do going forward. If your company is at the other extreme, where you have a single product manager or you don't have a product manager at all, and you just have like a CTO or technical co-founder or something like that wears the hat of product manager from time to time, then that's a different story. I see also among co-location companies, among data center operators, it's actually quite common to have product and marketing roll up into a single C-level executive. And that's fine as well. You just need to make sure that to really do this at a true enterprise level, where you're dealing with a very sophisticated level of competition, it's really far-fetched to have much success if you're not at the stage where you have one or more dedicated people on your product team to figure out, both initially and on an ongoing basis, what kind of capabilities your company needs to be developing and providing around co-location, POP sites, and disaster recovery. So with that all in mind, what is the marketing and selling all about? Well, you have your ICP. So from your ideal client profile, you can back into building a target account list for account-based marketing. This might be anywhere from a few dozen to more than likely a few hundred, in some cases a few thousand companies that you would love to have as clients. And those more will get eventually assigned out to account executives on your company's team, and perhaps sales development rep working on that team, as well as a support for the A's, for the account executives. For the most part, when you're talking about selling to enterprises, you're going to be using a very traditional sales-led playbook. That said, it's more important than ever for your enterprise clients to see your sales team, especially your more seasoned senior members of your sales team, as true experts on anything and everything having to do with Colo and Pop and DR. Now, that doesn't mean that the account executives needs to be the be all end all expert. They may need to only be at a strong intermediate level on a lot of these topics, but they sure as heck should have like a solution engineer or a sales engineer that's part of that team that comes into the more technical sales opportunities and supplements that expertise, because it's incredibly important now in a self-directed buyer's journey that your client-facing team is able to show up in a way that they're seen more as consultants, like enterprise Big Four consultants, as if your prospects and clients were talking with someone that worked for like EY or PwC or KPMG or Deloitte or something like that, or Accenture or Kyndryl. Your sales team needs to have that vibe and have that positioning so that your prospects and clients want to spend time with members of your sales team, as opposed to your sales team having to chase and beg and borrow and cajole and manipulate to get these appointments. When your client-facing team is able to share helpful, unique insights that's way beyond what they can find on your website, on websites in general, on social media, on their chat, their assistants, whatever it is, they will be invited into the prospects and clients side of their table. And that's super, super important, because if you're not invited in, chances are a competitor, an indirect competitor, a direct competitor, whatever it is getting that kind of leg up on your company. And it's going to be really difficult to compete if you're treading water right out of the gate. So with selling to, with marketing to, that change in positioning so that your entire client-facing team is seen as teachers, trusted advisors, consultants, subject matter experts, and even thought leaders on Colo, DR, and Pop is going to be incredibly important. And marketing needs to collaborate with members of your sales team so that they are showing up in podcasts from time to time. So they're showing up, at least moderating educational events like webinars and breakfast seminars, and it can make an enormous, enormous difference in how your prospects and clients perceive those client-facing team members. I'm not telling you that you necessarily need to go in and come up with better synonyms on everyone's job titles, on their LinkedIn profiles and their email signature and on their business cards, but I can tell you without a doubt that the more technical of a decision committee, of a decision maker that you're selling to in these enterprise clients, the more likely it is that they've become really, really sales allergic. So there's got to be a better way for you to show up. And one of the most effective ways to show up is they want to spend time with experts. They don't want to spend time with vendors. So to the extent that you're sharing, your team is prepared to share unique insights about how stakeholders in similar companies and similar geographies and similar kinds of business models and industries have navigated these specific issues around Colo, Pop, and DR, the more welcome your team is going to be. And you're a lot of old school, a lot of traditional salespeople that have been in this for decades are fiercely resisting, saying that that stuff, so that's all marketing, that's not me. And 10 years ago, that was pretty likely true. But the reality is, being a thought leader, being a subject matter expert is no longer a nice to have. In a world where your prospects and clients don't want to meet with someone on your sales team until they're at least 83% of the way through the buyer's journey, showing up as the consultant, the teacher, the trusted advisor, the expert is not a nice to have. It is now a must have. So in that context, your sales team, your sales professionals need to be prepared to come in much earlier on in the buyer's journey than they historically have. And your SDRs, your sales development reps, your BDRs, your business development reps, they also need to be involved in some way, shape, or form with these initiatives, even if they're just a great tour guide or a great concierge of these more premium internal resources that you have. And along the same lines, your marketing team should look a lot more like a media company that's being built to specialize around the most important buyer personas in these enterprise accounts. So they create amazing educational content and resources, incredibly helpful podcasts and live streams and webinars and breakfast seminars and lunch and learns and symposia and conferences and virtual conferences, so that your company is able to saturate those 28 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision, so that your prospects, your enterprise prospects and clients are getting so much exceptional value from what it is that you provide that there's no reason for them to look elsewhere, because they're getting everything that they need from your company. And when you do that, and you're able to stay with those prospects and clients throughout the full journey, you kind of squeeze out the oxygen supply for your competitive forces, for your direct and indirect competitors. So much to the point that when your prospects and clients reach that decision stage, when they're 83% plus of the way through their buyer's journey, you may discover that your Colo and Pop and DR is not only on the short list, it may be the only thing left on the short list, meaning that your amazing educational resources and educational events have been so ridiculously helpful that they've knocked out all of the competitive options. So those are some of the really, really important considerations to think about in today's modern self-driven buyer's journey for a company that's a data center provider that sells to enterprise IT using Colo for POP sites and disaster recovery as a service. Next question up is, so next question up is, how does a data center builder modernize its sales and marketing? How does a company that's in data center building, data center construction, modernize its sales and marketing? That's a fantastic question. I don't want to pick on construction companies, but the reality is I think it's pretty widely known among forward-leaning go-to-market strategists and marketers and salespeople in this space that a lot of construction companies are still using the same marketing and sales playbook that they did for the last 10 or 20 years. Meaning that when you look at the data center operators, co-location and hyperscale companies, and for sure technology companies and facilities companies, most of them have had amazing content marketing, product marketing, sales enablement, thought leadership kind of content investments for the better part of a decade now. Not all, but a lot. You can certainly find great case studies in all of those areas. When you get to construction, not so much. So construction in many cases is still leaning on a very real estate centric, very traditional offline playbook that depends a lot on like conferences and golf tournaments and taking people out for steak dinners and ball games. And it's not to say that those things aren't effective in other part of the data center ecosystem, but just anecdotally and what I observe, the builders, the construction companies tend to be the most digitally resistant. They truly believe that their prioritized buyer personas just haven't changed that much over the last 5 or 10 years. The reality, though, is that when it comes to a data center operator, when it comes to an enterprise IT company with their own data centers, when it comes to a hyperscale technology facilities company, at this stage of the game, the modern self-propelled buyer's journey, the baby boomers that are still active in the workforce, the ones at least I hang out with, they love LinkedIn. They love watching YouTube videos. They attend webinars. They get all of this stuff. So, of course, as you move to the younger generations, you move to Gen X, my generation, you move to millennials, and you move to Gen Z, you will for sure find higher levels of self-driven buyer's journey, higher levels of digital adoption. So when I look at the baby boomers that I hang out with that are still active in this industry, and they use their smartphones to do tons of self-directed research, and they're active on LinkedIn, and they watch podcasts and watch YouTube videos and attend webinars, and they get it. I don't quite understand the construction playbook that markets to the digitally resistant person. Like, who are these outliers that are the majority of decision committees that you're making these huge investments to? I don't get it. So what I would encourage you to do is when it comes to modernizing your sales and marketing is to really dial in your ideal client profile. Get super specific on where your ideal clients are located, their company sizes, and what business models, what industries they're located in. Then within those kinds of companies, for sure, build out a list of a couple dozen, a couple hundred companies who'd be great clients. And then within those companies, who are the most important stakeholders on the decision committee that you need to be building relationships with? And from that, then go do your actual interviews. Talk to 5, 10, 15 people in each of those groups, and your primary buyer personas and your secondary buyer personas, and find out what their biggest goals are. Figure out what the biggest challenges, the stressors that they're going through when it comes to a major data center construction project, where they hang out online, where they hang out offline, where they get their information. The consensus on this, in their own words, is incredibly important to figuring out where you should prioritize your own investments. And I think the data center construction companies, the data center builders that are still running sales and marketing like they did 10 or 20 years ago have more than likely completely dropped the ball on that simple little exercise that you can do a fantastic job on, usually within a couple of weeks. It doesn't take hundreds of hours, couple dozen hours usually. Maybe if you're a huge company, you spend a little more. Maybe you spend 6 or 8 weeks on it instead of 3 or 4 weeks on it. But getting super, super crisp about who they are, what they care about, how they get promoted in their job, how they could get the opposite of promoted in their job, and what's driving them nuts. All of those things are incredibly important for modernizing your sales and marketing playbook, because once you know their priorities in their own words, then it becomes a lot easier to make the right kind of investments, to get the messaging right, get the educational resources, the events right, both online events like webinars and live streams, as well as offline events like breakfast seminars, lunch and learn symposiums, educational sessions at other people's conferences, because you're focusing on what's top of mind for them, and not what you think is top of mind for them, but what's actually top of mind for them, because you've segmented and done the research properly on how to prioritize all these kinds of initiatives. The second part is to recognize that we now live in a world where most prospects and clients for even things like data center construction projects are doing a ton of research on their own before you meet them. So much so that like 83%, that's Gartner's number, of a typical journey is over before you meet a prospect or client. That means nearly all of their research, comparing options and evaluating pricing, happens without you being in the room. And the only way that you're going to get back into the room is by showing up as a consultant, a teacher, a subject matter expert, a trusted advisor. Incredibly, incredibly important to think about that change in positioning. So anyone that's in a sales development, business development, account executive role for your company needs to get upskilled, whether it's you doing it, whether you're hiring more seasoned people, a combination of the two, so that your prospects and clients perceive all of the members of your client-facing team as being able to deliver a ton of value. No one needs a member of your sales or marketing team to read the website to them. They can, the search and social, all the great tools have won that battle already. What they need is they need someone to come in and analyze what's going on for this particular construction project. They need someone that can share unique insights about how companies in their geographic region, in their business model, at their size, and this particular kind of stakeholder typically navigate this journey. What happens beyond the current step 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way through the 28 steps between complete stranger and ultimate purchase decision. So that person should appear a lot more like they're doing free consulting and a lot less like they're focused on closing a deal, closing a sale, closing a lease, closing a major construction project that has to do with data center construction, DCRE, data center real estate. And when you do that at an elite level, you start to gradually starve out the air supply for your competitors, because they're spending so many of those 28 touch points with members of your team. They're learning so much that there's really not a lot of reason for them to look outside. And when you do that, that is a huge, huge, huge positioning boss move, whatever you want to call it, to ensuring that you stay on the short list throughout the full journey, throughout that full due diligence, that whole planning and development, RFP project, all of that stuff. So what it really comes down to is, can your company culture as a data center builder, as a data center construction company, is it aware of just how much your ideal clients and the decision committees have changed within these companies? And are you willing to make these changes? Are the members of your team willing to make these changes? And especially for a data center builder, a data center construction company, I think a lot of these initiatives, a lot of these mandates need to start at the top. If your CEO, if your chief commercial officer, whatever you want to call it, can't find a half hour for a meeting once a week or a couple times a month to drive this kind of initiative forward, it's going to more than likely fall flat, because these are changes that happen at a deep, deep cultural level within a company, where they make a decision, they flip a switch and say, going forward, as of this date, starting in this quarter, we are investing massive resources, betting the company on the idea that our prospects, our clients for data center building, data center construction, need to see our team members as the go-to experts in our industry. So it's not even close. So we're number one in this space, and number 2, 3, 4, 5 on that list is so far behind that it's so obvious to your prospects and clients that they're going to want to spend time with your team and not the laggards that are kicking and screaming, resisting about these kinds of changes. So there's a lot that data center builders, there's a lot that construction companies can learn from observing what the operators and the technology companies, especially with the facilities companies as well, have done in the space over the last decade to educate and build trust with their most important stakeholders. So a lot of this, when it comes to a data center builder modernizing its sales and marketing, is getting really, really close to your prospects and clients, so you can really deeply understand what it takes for you to add value to their professional lives. And then on a concerted, extended basis over a period of months, starting with days and weeks, obviously, but over months and years, making sure that you're showing up in the right places, at the right time, for the right people, and most of all in the right context, so that your team members are seen as the go-to definitive experts on anything and everything having to do with data center building in your geographic market, for the company sizes that matter most and the business models that are most relevant to your company's core expertise.
Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that's www.dcsmi.com. Now, back to Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A.
Hey there, Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute. We are all about elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market professionals in the growth of the data center industry. And you're watching our weekly live stream, the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. Next question up that we're going to look at this week is, how can data center providers track email for lead generation? How do data center providers track email for lead generation? In order to address that, we need to first get on the same page about lead generation, because among different members of your go-to-market team, there sometimes are a couple of different definitions of what lead generation actually is. Among members of your marketing team, people that specialize in content marketing, branding, event marketing, lead generation, sales enablement, they tend to think of a lead as an early stage identified contact that potentially is going to be worked or nurtured or accelerated into some late stage of, is this contact ready to be passed along to the sales team? And in some cases, when it comes to inbound lead generation, that particular contact has landed on your website and has completed a form on a landing page for something like an ebook or a special report, or they've registered for a webinar or an on-demand webinar, or registered for some kind of event, and you know a first and a last and an email address. You probably know a company and maybe one or two other pieces of data about that particular lead. That particular lead is not ready for a sales conversation yet. It's just a known contact who has gotten enough value from your company so far. They're like, that blog post, that podcast, pretty good, pretty sick stuff. What else do they have to say? Oh, there's an ebook or a webinar that goes into this in more detail. Like, yeah, sure, I'll trade my business card for what's on the other side of that landing page, because so far so good. They're delivering amazing value here. So that is from the standpoint of your marketing team and your CRM. That is a lead. Does that mean that that lead is ready to pass immediately onto your sales team? It depends. The way most companies typically look at this is they evaluate fit, FIT, and interest. Now, when we're talking about fit, we're not talking about like going to the gym and working out and cardio and weightlifting. We're talking about how well does this lead fit your ideal client profile? How well does this fit your target addressable market? If they fit perfectly, in many cases, that lead will be immediately passed to the sales team for very early nurturing and some very early touch points. If that lead is more marginal or much less qualified or unqualified, they will typically stay with marketing for quite some time for additional nurturing, email nurturing, being invited to certain kinds of events or webinars or something like that, until they build up a certain lead score or build up enough interest that it becomes painfully obvious that this lead should be passed along to the sales team. So that's a lead. When a member of your sales team, usually manually, but in some cases automatically, depending on rules, looks at a particular lead and says, yeah, this person, this particular company, they look pretty good. This is who we want our sales team to be speaking with. We're going to accept that lead. That lead is sales qualified. So sales accepted lead, SAL, sales qualified lead, SQL. And then when a member of the sales team, it could be a SDR, sales development rep, or an account executive, depending on how your sales team is structured, meets with that person and they spend a little bit of time with them, and they make a determination. They may determine that that lead is ready to be advanced into an opportunity, a sales opportunity, because the person that's met with them has a rough idea that there could be a future close date and a future estimated deal size, and puts those pieces of data in the CRM. And you now have an opportunity. It may be a very early stage opportunity, but a human from your sales team, or some kind of rules-based equivalent, if you use product-led or self-driven service as opposed to sales-led service, someone or some piece of logic has looked at that particular lead and said, yes, this is an opportunity. The reason that I want to clarify this is a lot of salespeople and a lot of C-level executives use the words opportunity and lead interchangeably. And this creates a lot of problems, a lot of friction, a lot of disagreements between sales and marketing teams. So I would encourage you, depending on how your CRM, your customer relationship management is set up, it doesn't matter whether you use HubSpot or Salesforce or Pipedrive or whatever. Just make sure you're on the same page about what a lead actually is versus what a lead is not. Because in many cases, the word lead is being used to identify an aspiration about a person who's much further along in their buyer's journey than that person actually is. So when it comes to tracking emails for lead generation, there's a couple of different ways that companies, data center providers, use emails for lead generation. The first way, I think that's the most popular way, but now the most problematic way in the world we live in, is you have a list of prospects who only have a very faint idea of who your company is, if they know who your company is at all. They're complete strangers. That person has no relationship with your company, and you're sending them a cold email. And if the cold email is really tone deaf, the whole purpose of the cold email is to try to get them to book a meeting with someone on your sales team, completely ignoring the reality that we live in now, where most of your best prospects don't want to meet with someone from your sales team until they're at least 83% of the way through the buyer's journey. That's Gartner stat. And it's a big difference from as recently as 10 years ago, when prospects, clients were willing to meet with sales professionals when they were like halfway through their buyer's journey, halfway through the sales cycle. The number was like 56% at the time. So it's ignoring that reality. And because of that, it's just not resonating. It's not landing. It's just being seen as annoying. The reality is, if you were a little more tuned into their preferences, their habits, what they want when they're trying to figure out a big problem that's going on in their company that might require a data center provider, is your cold emails might offer them an educational resource, like a downloadable report, an ebook, a planning guide, a newsletter, a webinar invitation, event invitation, something like that, that gives you an opportunity to get someone that says, yeah, that sounds pretty good. I'd like to learn more. But they don't want to learn more by immediately being put into your sales process. They don't want to be immediately put into a jerkathon, overly aggressive prospecting qualification process. And I'm not saying that your company necessarily has this problem, but there certainly are a lot of bad actors in this space. And when you look at the most trusted and least trusted professions, data center salespeople typically aren't looked at individually, but salespeople in general, they're getting lumped in with a lot of salespeople from certain industries that don't have a good rep. So when it comes to your email, just recognize that the cold outreach, if you're not showing up as an educator or a consultant or a subject matter expert or a thought leader, it is a very, very uphill battle in today's modern self-driven buyer's journey. So that's using email for cold emails for lead generation. And of course, you can track the ultimate conversions on that. A conversion might be someone visiting a landing page and filling out a form to register for a webinar or something like that. In some cases, you can track the opens and the clicks. We're kind of in this no man's land world where Apple, a couple of years ago now, has blocked the ability to track opens reliably on iPhones. Google, Alphabet was supposed to be right behind them, but they've perpetually delayed and given more life to the third-party cookie and continues to have life on the third-party cookie. But we know it's getting increasingly difficult to track third-party cookies and make sense of all the attribution and email open rates. So yeah, for sure on colds, you can track that. On conversions, you can track that. The reality is, if you're doing this the right way and you recognize that there's going to be 28 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision, email, when it's used correctly, should be used to support your segmentation and your personalization strategy. What does that mean? As a data center provider, you have your ideal client profile that drives developing a target account list. Within those target account lists, you have a strong idea for your kind of data center related products and services, who the ideal buyers are. Those are your buyer personas. Those are the members of your decision committee. And the most important ones are your primary buyer persona. The second most important ones are your secondary buyer persona. For big enough accounts, for big enough opportunities, you likely segment into a tertiary buyer persona. You may have a negative buyer persona where when somebody picks a certain drop-down choice on a lead generation form, or you're doing outbound or something like that, you specifically have a certain kind of person that you want to actively exclude from the buyer's journey because they're not your friend. They don't want your company to have a role in their company. So you have your first and your second priorities. With that in mind, that will drive your segmentation strategy of at least who they are. Then there's a second kind of segmentation strategy of where they are in their relationship with your company. And there's 2 or 3 different ways that this is approached in the data center industry and technology companies, facilities companies on a more macro basis. So with the relationship with your company, there's a buyer's journey. That's a self-propelled, self-driven, buyer-centric way of evaluating where they are in the relationship with figuring something out that they ultimately will eventually make a purchase decision around. And there's 3 stages of that: awareness, consideration, and decision. In the awareness stage, they know there's a big goal they're trying to figure out, or a big challenge, stressor that they're trying to figure out a solution to. They don't have a category name yet, and for sure, they're not looking at companies. If you were able to get your company in during the awareness stage, and you're able to educate and build trust with an ideal buyer persona, with a primary, secondary buyer persona, and an ideal account in that awareness stage, oh my gosh, you're like so head and shoulders above everyone else in the industry. And keep investing in those kinds of relationships. You're able to stay with them throughout the buyer's journey when they move from awareness to consideration. In the consideration stage, they're starting to compare the different options that are in front of them, not at a company level, but at a category level. So at that point, they'll give what they're trying to figure out an actual name, and they'll be able to evaluate different kinds of approaches to solving that name. So a comparison guide, a buyer's guide, a webinar that continues to educate and build trust with them, or webinar series that continues to educate and build trust with them, either how-tos or panels or live case studies. All of those can be incredibly impactful to giving your best prospects and clients a reason to spend time with members of your client-facing team during the consideration stage. When they move from consideration to decision, then they're finally open to looking at individual companies. And the reality is, most data center providers that aren't doing a very good job with this, if they're showing up at all, are showing up in the decision stage, acting as if everyone that walks through the door is immediately ready to sit down with an intrusive sales process. The reality is 95% of ideal clients are just not in market right now. They could be a great fit a couple of weeks, a couple of months, several months out, but they're not ready for that kind of sales contact right now. And if you insist on that, you're going to alienate them. You're going to burn a ton of goodwill. They're just going to think you're a bunch of selfish jerks. And I don't think that's really the positioning that you want your company to be seen in the light of. We want your company to be seen as experts. We want them to be seen as the best experts on the planet when it comes to anything and everything having to do with what it is that your company does as a data center provider. And in order to do that, we need to be very self-aware about what those prospects and clients want from our company early on, what they want in the middle of their buyer's journey, and what they want at the end of the buyer's journey. So that's the buyer's journey. Next, in your CRM, you might track by life cycle stage. It's kind of the life cycle stage is kind of the opposite of the buyer's journey. Buyer's journey is very buyer-centric from your prospects and clients' perspective. Life cycle stage is internal, what you care about, what your RevOps team cares about, what your marketers, what your sales professionals care about, what your CEO, what your C-level, your CFO, what they care about. So it's like lead, sales qualified, opportunity, client, evangelist. There's 4 or 5 categories, and it's from what you care most about. Within the opportunity category of your life cycle stage, there's often a deal stage. And it's just a more granular way of evaluating where an opportunity is and likelihood to close. And if you think there's a lot of variations of life cycle stage, opportunities within the opportunity life cycle stage, the deal stages get very, very customized and dialed into how you run your sales process. There could be a few, there could be a lot, but either way, generally to move from one deal stage to another, the prospect has to take some kind of behavior on the prospect's part that indicate that they're truly advancing to the next stage. And again, doesn't matter whether you use HubSpot or Salesforce or one of another dozen possible alternatives, but that's your deals board, that's your pipeline. It has a probability of close, it has dates, and that's what basically allows you to quantify the value of your pipeline and when you can expect revenue to hit a particular company. So yeah, you have buyer's journey, you have life cycle stages, and you have deal stages. To get your prospects and clients to advance from a buyer's journey stage or a life cycle stage, if you're using email marketing, you're typically going to customize and personalize that email marketing at the intersection of who they are and where they are. So the where they are is the journey stage or the life cycle stage. The who they are is the buyer personas. So when you're using email with that in mind, the more they're spending time with your company, the more likely it is that it's pretty valuable to know if a prospect is opening an email or if multiple prospects from the same account are opening the email and are clicking and are generating micro conversions. And again, the dicey part with all of this is Apple has already a few years ago now declared war on your ability to do this on iPhones. Google Alphabet is not far behind. There's a lot of, and depending on where you're located, especially if you're located in the European Union, there's a lot of backlash among privacy experts, among the ability to actually be able to track email for supporting lead generation and track email in general. So recognize that the tools exist. The technologies are probably not going to exist forever. You're going to need to get more creative on how you stay with and earn your way in with prospects and clients throughout their active research and decision-making process. So it can be helpful to track emails. It can be helpful to track which emails are working better or which emails are working worse. But the most important mindset is to show up early and often and add a ton of value so that your emails are actually educating and building trust, not constantly repulsing and turning people off. Next question up is, how do we market a small data center that only has 1,400 square feet available to lease? So how do we market a small data center that only has 1,400 square feet of space available to lease? The challenge with marketing a single location data center that only has a relatively small amount of space is a lot of the investments that you need to make for customer insight, for content marketing, for sales enablement, for event marketing are really not much different when you're doing so with looking to rent to a couple of tenants or a couple of clients as opposed to a couple dozen or a couple hundred. And that's one of many reasons why over time you see a lot of small co-location providers rolling up together, merging together. Going back the better part of 10 years now, I've had conversations multiple times a quarter, in some cases multiple times a month, with owners of these small co-location operators, encouraging them to scale up in one of two ways, or in some cases both ways. Way number one is to recognize as a single location co-location operator, if you don't have even co-location space that you're renting in someone else's facility outside of your geographic region in another part of your country and another part of the world, there is going to be a very finite ceiling on the level of sophistication that you can attract and retain with your existing clients. Because in the world we live in now, it's really, really risky for an IT manager, for a decision maker to contract with a single location co-location operator that doesn't have at least one or two options that are geographically protected for disaster recovery reasons. That's completely forgetting about everything that has to do with edge and latency. That's strictly from a DR perspective. So that's problem number one. And obviously, the least risk, the least capital intensive way to solve that is instead of building your own facilities in different geographic regions, renting co-location space in a larger or mid-tier kind of co-location facility in another state, in another country, whatever works best for your kind of clients. And that's a business strategy decision. The second way to potentially expand is by expanding your share of wallet with your local clients. And when I say local clients, a single location co-location operator doesn't have to have the majority of its clients be local, but that's usually what ends up happening. Why? Because in addition to a relatively unsophisticated IT manager that isn't insisting on having multiple co-location facilities from the same company, you usually are using some very basic marketing and sales, if you have proactive marketing and sales at all, beyond word of mouth. So what ends up happening is you end up mostly with local clients who love the idea of being able to have direct access to the owner or the CEO of the company and are willing to trade off some other things. That's not to say that if you do search engine optimization right, or you do some digital ads, that you may occasionally get some people from way outside your geographic region who want a presence in your area. But what I've found, especially with small local co-location operators that have a few handfuls or 10 or 20 employees, they usually, if they're not having multiple locations, they're probably not investing a lot in sales and marketing or growth either. And because of that, they tend to end up with a very localized client base. So leaning into that, what can you do to grow your share of wallet with those local clients that are picking you because you're local and they love being able to have a face-to-face relationship and get there fast? With that in mind, managed service providers should be someone that you're partnering with and potentially merging or acquiring, because there's very, very few business models that are going to have so much potential synergy with your client base than managed service providers that are already serving as like fractional outsourced IT for local small and medium-sized businesses in your area. So you could start your courtship, you could start your dating, you could start your relationship building by having an informal or a more formal partnership program. You can host local meetups, networking events for these kinds of companies. But ultimately, if you're insistent that you're not going to have geographic diversity among your co-location locations, getting into the managed services business to provide a much broader menu of service could be a really, really smart play. The first cousin of managed service providers are two other categories of fractional outsourced expertise that small, medium-sized businesses in your local region are likely engaging. How do you know who they're engaging? Spend more time with your clients. Figure out like who their internal team is and who their external team is. Because if they outsource to a fractional CTO, if they outsource to a local managed service provider company, there's a really good chance that even if they have an internal bookkeeper or an internal accountant or internal controller, they may also have a relationship, that particular client or clients may also have a relationship with a fractional CFO or a CPA firm or outsourced accounting or outsourced bookkeeping firm. So that's outsourced professional services category number 2 that SMBs, small and medium-sized businesses, frequently encounter that could be a synergy with your company. Outsourced category number 3 are outsourced marketing companies, fractional CMOs, marketing agencies. Again, there may be a person internally that's liaison between the owner or director of sales or something like that. But the reality is they likely don't have the resources to do the 5, 6, 7, 10 different things that need to be done to help that company move forward. So a lot of the kinds of companies that find a managed service provider agreement appealing also find a fractional CFO and a fractional CMO, chief financial officer, chief marketing officer, appealing. Does that mean that a small single location co-location provider should be looking at merging or rolling up a CFO, fractional CFO or fractional CMO business? Not highest on the list. The managed service provider that spends a lot of time on cybersecurity infrastructure is usually the clear one, but just understand that there's CPAs that specialize in cybersecurity and SOC compliance. There are marketing agencies, marketing companies that do web development that need a place for their servers to host all of their sites. So for sure, if you're avoiding geographic diversity for your 1,400 square foot co-location data center business, perhaps you want to grow your share of wallet a little bit or massively by looking at potentially rolling up or merging in one or more managed service providers or some of these other categories of outsourced businesses that work with the same kind of small and medium-sized businesses that your local co-location company may be doing really well with. That said, there are some local co-location companies that have used their personal network over the years to get a foot in the door with some medium-sized companies, with some government entities, with colleges, with school boards. And again, they're usually winning because the decision maker values the face-to-face contact of knowing the owner directly more than a lot of other considerations. Like you think about a small manufacturing company that does 5 or 10 million a year in revenue, has a couple dozen employees. How likely is it that if that company contracts with co-location with one of the huge publicly traded REITs, that they're going to have the CEO's phone number on the speed dial in their mobile phone, that they're going to have direct access to that person? Exceptionally low probability. They'll more than likely have an account manager. They may have that account manager's manager, director, VP, whatever it is, but they're not going to, for their investment of 10,000, 50,000, whatever it is a year, or your local currency equivalent, they're just not going to have that deep of a relationship all the way up the leadership chain. A lot of what people are buying with the 1,400 square foot single co-location provider is deep roots in the community. Deep roots among the owner, that stability, being able to get there, visit their server hugging, all of that stuff. So if you want to market a small data center that only has 1,400 square foot available to lease, you could use a lot of digital stuff. You could for sure use webinars marketed to a target account list of locally based companies. You could do a podcast where you interview your best clients and companies that are like those best clients. So you have an excuse for them to share your great content that you've collaborated on among their clients, but you may be doing a lot of really traditional things like local meetups, lunch and learns, speaking at local business groups, local industry specific groups. Those are some things that are still really, really popular plays among the small 1,400 square foot, the small single location co-location operator. And they become a lot of times the only viable plays because the cost of having a sponsorship presence at a national conference is really cost prohibitive for a company that size. But a local event could be right in your wheelhouse where you can have a small exhibit table, an expo table for a few $100s or all in by the time you get done, with opportunity costs of bringing your staff members together, having swag, having giveaways, still like in the low four figures. So these are all plays that it's going to vary contextually depending on how aggressive your growth plans, whether you really aspire to be a colo company that has multiple locations and can go after a more sophisticated kind of client and at higher price points with better margins, or whether you're happy being the local community focused co-location operator that has no aspirations to having space in additional co-locations and wants to lean in very heavily into community marketing. So the final question that we're going to be addressing for this week on the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A live stream is, how do data center integrators make sure that clients can become referenceable after that experience? How can data center integrators make sure that their clients become referenceable after that experience? So this is a challenge that affects the entire life cycle of the client, because all too often people think that the opportunity for a client to be referenceable starts with your customer success, your CSMs, your account managers, your AMs. But the reality is there's culpability, there's opportunity, there's potential for the opposite of opportunity, blame, falling down, dropping the ball, whatever you want to call it, across the entire go-to-market team, starting with the executive leadership. So how clear is it for your company as a data center integrator? How crystal clear is it about where you can win the best deals, where you can deliver the best value for your clients, where you are able to provide exceptional, unique value that they can't get anywhere else, and where your clients become an extension of your sales force by shouting your praises from the top of the digital buildings and giving you fantastic reviews and case studies and testimonials. That's going to start all the way up at the leadership level of your company. And it really depends on your size. If you're a relatively small to mid-sized company, that's a CEO level, C-suite kind of conversation. If you have a chief product officer, a CPO, not to be confused with the character from Star Wars, if you have a chief product officer, a CPO, then they will think a lot about product market fit and go-to-market fit and who the ideal clients are and where you can win most often as a data center integrator. Absent that, when you look at the case study section of your website, what do they have in common? With that in mind, how tight is your ideal client profile so that your entire go-to-market team is focused on the same exact kind of client, that you're really dialed into where those clients are located, how many employees they have, what business models, what industries. Getting alignment on that, getting consensus on that can have a dramatic impact on downstream NPS, Net Promoter Score, customer satisfaction, your clients becoming an extension of your sales force and becoming referenceable after the experience. I have a little bit of a problem with the end of that question, after the experience. Does the experience actually really end? Or are we looking to build clients that we have a long-term relationship with for months and years? I recognize that a lot of integrators still sell a fairly transactional kind of engagement where there's a beginning, middle, and end. Some of them will sell maintenance and some ongoing support and advisory, but they're sold more of a project as to a recurring as a service kind of different than like a managed services approach. So with that in mind, assuming you're really dialed into who your ideal clients are and your entire go-to-market team across all the disciplines, marketing, sales, account managers, product managers, channel partnership managers, the exec suite, you all see eye to eye on that. That's step number one for getting your integrator clients to be referenceable, is having strong consensus on who they are and what they care about. And what they care about will for sure show up in surveys. It'll show up in buyer persona interviews and buyer persona documents. It'll show up in the methodology that your account managers, your customer success uses to onboard new clients and uses to help continue to educate and build trust with those new clients. But it's bigger than that, because if your marketing messaging is off, you're attracting the wrong people. If your sales development reps, if your account executives are making promises that don't really align with what your company can do and is best suited to be delivering as a data center integrator, that also can create a lot of problems downstream that are anywhere from very difficult to nearly impossible to fix post-purchase. Your product manager needs to be spending, your product management team, your CPO, needs to be spending a lot of time with your ideal clients to understand what it is that they truly need, and to make sure that your company is making the investments to be able to deliver on those promises. If in addition to direct sales, you have a channel partnership arm of channel account managers, channel consultants that help attract and onboard and retain and activate new different kinds of channel partners that work with your companies, which for an integrator is more than likely would be like managed service providers or IT consultants or something like that. They also need to have enormous, well-placed alignment across who the ideal client is. Because if they're running a different playbook, both your channel team and your channel partners, that can also spell disaster that runs into brand damage, reputation management problems later on. So as the better job you can do with being proactive and being out in front of your ideal client profile definition and making sure that there's really true buy-in across all of the sales and marketing go-to-market playbooks across your full team, you will head off a lot of these issues proactively. Second is the positioning. In the world we live in now with the self-driven buyer's journey, most kinds of considered purchases in the data center ecosystem, especially among an integrator, it's highly likely that your prospects and clients are spending a ton of time doing self-directed research before an AE or account executive or sales development rep from your company meets with a prospect or a potential client. So with that in mind, we need to figure out a way for your sales team to get invited in to the prospects side of the table. And in order to do that, they can't be seen, by they, I mean your sales team can no longer be seen as focused on just a transaction. They need to be seen more as consultants, teachers, subject matter experts, trusted advisors, and in some cases, even thought leaders about anything and everything that's relevant to data center integration. So if you're fortunate enough to already have some team members that bring that kind of knowledge and expertise to their conversations with prospects and clients, give yourself a nice pat on the back. It's great. Now you need to get the rest of the team to at least up to a strong intermediate level on most of the kinds of issues that come up among your prioritized buyer personas throughout the full buyer's journey. So this is better onboarding, this is better investments in professional development, because you could go in right now and come up with a better synonym for LinkedIn profiles and email signatures and business cards than account executive or sales development rep. The problem is that the job title inflation is not going to help you. What you really need is you need to have that culture among your team members that they're going to show up and be able to add value to these conversations, as opposed to just reading what's on a website or reading what's on a slide. So much value that your prospects and clients want to spend time with members of your sales team because they see it as like free consulting. It feels to them that like they're talking to someone who could work for PwC or EY or KPMG or Deloitte or Accenture or Tata or something like that. It's just off the charts in terms of the value that they're getting. And because of that, your sales team really doesn't have to work hard to get a foot in the door, because your prospects will actually want to spend time with members of your sales team, because they're not just answering questions, they're sharing unique insights about what companies just like that go through when they navigate these kind of initiatives around data center integration. not just what they go through at the company level, but what individuals, stakeholders, what teams go through. That's unique to that kind of company, in that kind of geographic region at that size. The more expertise those individual members have, the more value they can add to your prospects and clients. So a lot of that sets the stage for the kind of positioning that your client team members need throughout the full journey, both pre and post purchase. And your account managers, your AMs, your CSMs, whatever you call them, in your that work with your integrator clients after they are post-purchase, after they're being onboarded and throughout the life cycle of that relationship, they also need to show up as experts. Your prospects cannot perceive that their primary job is cross-sells and upsells. That's part of the reason why it's especially problematic to have CS, to have AMs reporting to a CRO or a VP of sales, because the VP of sales is focused on getting new revenue this week and this month. Whereas the reality is, if you care about things like being referenceable after the experience, you got to be willing to play the long game. And if you think of your AEs and your SDRs as like big four consultants, your account managers, your customer success managers need to look like the MBA, the Masters in Business Administration, or like PhD, the doctoral version of the kind of expertise that that particular person brings to the table. It's easier said than done. These are big cultural changes. A lot of companies resist investing a lot of resources in professional development among your team members. But if you want true differentiation, so your team members are in the business of educating and trust building, which is the first cousin of those clients ultimately becoming referenceable. These are really, really important investments to make. On my podcast, I've interviewed people that are like in sales leadership roles among co-location operators, and when they describe what they spend their time on nights and weekends in their IT lab in their basement, I am amazed, jaw-dropping kind of amazed at the skill set that they bring to the table. And this is not the majority. These are still the edge cases at this point. But like, they're walking through this, and I'm like, this sounds like someone that could be a fractional CTO to SMBs, to small and medium-sized businesses. That's the level of expertise that they're bringing to their clients. So if your SDRs, if your AEs, your AMs, if they don't have that kind of expertise to bring that level of value to your clients, it's time to invest in them. And if they're not willing to absorb those investments and change the level at which they operate among your clients, they may not be the right people long-term for your company, or maybe they should be in another role with your company. Because at the end of the day, that expertise is the key to getting in early and getting in often, with the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all, in the right context. So your entire client-facing team is seen as the be-all, end-all experts when it comes to anything and everything having to do with data center integration. That's the key to getting more referenceable accounts. So that's the final question that I'll be addressing for this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. You want to make sure that you stay up to date about new events and educational resources just like this. Make sure that you're subscribed to our Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter. You can sign up. You can subscribe for that directly on our website at www.dcsmi.com. Again, I'm Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI. We're all about elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market professionals in the growth of the data center industry. And we host this Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A live stream each week to answer some of the biggest sales and marketing challenges that we hear being talked about throughout the entire data center ecosystem. We wish you great success in growing your career and growing your team's influence and growing your company's influence throughout the data center ecosystem. Let us know how we can help, and we look forward to seeing you back again next week. Take care now.
Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that's www.dcsmi.com.